Okay, so in this part we're going to make a simple ceiling for the ground floor. But first of all I want to drag this window grid into the ground floor null object and rename its selection tag to edges for beveling. I'm going to use a simple cube for creating the ceiling, and I want the ceiling to be flush with the pillars, so we have to make this cube a size of 2628 by 2628 units. And I want this ceiling to be 42 units high, and we also need 3 segments on the y-axis. I'm going to rename this cube to ground floor ceiling and make it editable. And next I want to move the object axis of the ceiling to the bottom edge, so I'm going to activate the object axis tool and the move tool. Let's check the snap settings here. We need edge and midpoint selected, and we need to make sure that the type is snap 2.5D. Now let's go to the front view, hit O, and then zoom in a little, and bring the object axis down until it snaps to the bottom edge, like so. Okay, now we can activate the model tool again and move the ceiling on top of the ground floor. And we have to enter 320 on the y-axis, because our ground floor is 320 units high. And next I'm going to the polygon mode and use the loop selection tool to select these 2 polygon loops. Then right click, extrude, and I'm going to use an offset of 30 here. And I'm using the loop selection again to select this polygon loop here, and again extrude it by 30 units. Next I want to get rid of some of these polygons on top here, because we don't need that many polygons. So let's select this polygon in the middle, and then use selection, grow selection twice, and then go to functions, melt. And just to make sure that we don't have any points left after melting these polygons, let's go to the point mode and have a quick look. It looks okay. So now let's go to the edge mode and use the loop selection tool to select our edges for beveling. Maybe you should deactivate stop at boundary edges here. And now I'm going to use the ring selection tool to select these edges and save this selection. And again we could do a quick test and bevel these edges, so right click, bevel, and let's use an offset of maybe 0.4. Bring the Phong angle down to 44. Do a quick test render, and it looks okay. Let's use Ctrl Z to get back to the unbeveled edges. What we could also do is add some simple color materials, because right now everything looks dull and gray, and adding some basic colors will make it a bit easier for us to see how the object looks. So let's go to the material manager and double click once to create a new material, double click again to create a second material, and then double click on one of these to bring up the material editor. I'm going to rename this first material to stone white and deselect specular. I'm going to bring the brightness of the color up to 100%. Now let's click on the second material. I'm going to rename this to glass and change the color to a darker tone, like so. Now we can drag these materials onto the individual objects. I want this white stone for the ground floor ceiling and for the stone girder and the pillars. And let's apply this glass material to the window pane. And now if you render this, everything looks a bit nicer and we have a better idea of how the object looks. Okay, so this wraps it up for part 8 of this tutorial. Let's move this ground floor ceiling into the ground floor null object and rename the selection tag to edges for beveling again. In the next bit we're going to start working on the door. So thanks for watching and I'll see you then. Bye bye. Hi, this is part 9 of my tutorial and now we're going to start working on the door. And the first thing I want to do here is get the ground floor ceiling out of the way by making it invisible. I want to put the door somewhere in the front wall of this building, which is over here, where the x-axis faces in this direction from the left to the right. And I don't want to put it right in the center of this wall, but I'm going to put it where the third window from the left is. And this is just to break up the uniformity of this building a bit. So what I'm going to do is select the window grid, the window pane, the window frames and the window sills, then go to the point mode, switch to the bottom view, change the cameras to top, hit O on the keyboard, and I'm using the rectangle selection tool to select the points in this area here where the third window from the left is located. Now we can simply delete these points, select the ground floor walls, go to the polygon mode and delete these polygons here, and this will create a gap in the wall down here on the right side and on the left side of this opening. And you may have noticed that sometimes it's kind of difficult to rotate the camera around a specific area, and this is because the camera always rotates around the object axis, which in this case is way back there. What we can do to make our lives a little easier is, for example, to select any of these polygons here. I'm going to select this one, and now the camera rotates around the object axis of this polygon. Okay, so now let's close these gaps. Go to the edge mode, and I'm using the bridge tool to bridge these two edges here. Then I'm going to select this edge here, rotate around it, and use the bridge tool again to close this gap. Now you can see that the pillars protrude into the opening here, and we have to fix that as well. So let's select the pillars, go to the point mode, and I'm going to select this point here as a reference, and this one is located at minus 250 meters on the x-axis. So let's select these 4 points and move them over to minus 250 as well. Now let's do the same thing over here. I'm going to select this point as a reference, and this one is positioned at minus 450 meters on the x-axis. So I'm going to select these points here and move these over to minus 450. Next I want to create a step for the entrance, and I'm going to use a disk object for this, and I want to change the settings for this disk object. So in the attribute manager, go to the slice tab and activate the slice option, and this will cut the disk in half. And right now it's facing in the wrong direction, but we can correct this by adjusting the slice angle from minus 180 to 0 degrees. I also want to reduce the amount of detail on this object, so let's go to the Object tab here and bring the disk segments down to 1, and I'm going to reduce the rotation segments to 24. Now let's make this object editable, and I'm going to rename it to step. And next we have to move this step over to the opening. So let's activate the move tool, the model tool, sorry. And I want to align this step with the pillars. So one way of finding out where we have to position our step is to select the pillars, go to the polygon mode, and select one of these front polygons here. And again, I'm using this as a reference, and you can see that it's positioned at minus 1314 on the z-axis. So I'm going to copy this number and select the step again, activate the model tool, and paste the number in the field for the z-axis. Apply this setting, and next we have to move our step over to the opening. And in order to position it exactly in the center of this opening, we can use one of the values that we've used before when copying or duplicating the window sills, window panes along this wall. Since our windows here are spaced apart evenly, we can use the same settings over and over again to copy objects around here. And this magic number is 350, so I'm going to move this step to minus 350 on the x-axis, and this will place it exactly in the center of this opening. And I also want to scale this object down a bit on the z-axis, so I'm going to activate the scale tool and click and drag on the blue handle to reduce the size, and I'm going to make this a size of 55. Next, let's go to the edge mode and select these two edges here. We're going to extrude these edges, and I want the extruded edges to be in line with the back of the ground floor walls. And since we know that the ground floor walls have a thickness of 30 units and these pillars have a thickness of 14 units, we need to extrude these edges by an amount of 44 meters. So let's right click and select extrude from the context menu and enter 44 as the offset. Apply these settings. Now let's go to the polygon mode, right click again, extrude, and I'm going to extrude these polygons twice, first by 9 meters and then again by 3 meters. And I'm using the left mouse button here to click and drag in the viewport to extrude these polygons. Okay, now I'm going to make this ground floor invisible and use the loop selection tool to select these polygons here. Then I'm going to deselect these two polygons at the back, right click and extrude these, and again I'm using an offset of 3 meters, and this will create this little edge here. Next, let's go to the edge mode and use the loop selection tool to select these edges here and deselect this edge and this edge over here. These are the edges that we need for beveling, so let's save this selection and rename it to edges for beveling as usual. And now let's make the ground floor visible again and have a look. I think this step needs to be a bit wider, so activate the model tool and I'm going to make this a size of 235, and I think this looks a little better. And also, if you want to, you can drag this white stone material onto the step. Let's do a quick test render. And it looks okay, I think. So this is it for this lesson. In the next bit we're going to start the door frame and the door blade. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you then. Bye bye. Okay, so in this part we're going to make a simple door frame, and since we have to make this door frame fit into this opening here, I'm going to use the ground floor walls to create the new geometry. So first of all, let's select the ground floor walls, go to the edge mode, and I'm going to use the bridge tool to bridge these two edges here and these two edges down there. And then let's go to the polygon mode, select these two polygons, right click and split them off. And since the ground floor walls are still selected, let's go ahead and delete these polygons again. And now I'm going to drag this new object out of the ground floor and make the ground floor invisible. I'm going to rename this to door frame. And I want to center the object axis on this door frame, so let's go ahead and use axis center. We can accept the default settings here, so let's just hit execute. And now I'm going to select these two polygons, right click and melt them. Then go to the point mode and select these 2 points here and delete them. Next I want to move these 2 points up a bit by plus 12 on the y-axis, and this will place them on our step. Next let's go back to the polygon mode and use extrude inner, and I want to use an offset of 7 here. And now let's select this polygon down here and delete it. Go to the edge mode and select this edge here, and I'm going to move this down by -7 on the y-axis, and this will align it with the other edges down here. Okay, now let's go back to the polygon mode, select this center polygon, right click and split it off. This will be our door blade. I'm going to make this invisible for the time being. Select the door frame again and delete this polygon, and then right click, extrude, and I want to extrude these polygons with an offset of 15, and I want to create caps as well. Now let's make this step invisible. I'm going to delete some of these polygons that we don't need. So select these and get rid of them. Then go to the edge mode and let's select our edges for beveling. I also want these edges here in the corners. Okay, so let's save this selection and rename it to edges for beveling. And this is our simple door frame. And maybe let's select the door frame and the step and hit Alt G on the keyboard to place them in a null object. And let's rename this to door. And before we start working on the details for the door blade, let's put it into position. Go to the model tool, and again I want to make sure that the axis is centered on this object. So let's use axis center to do the job. And I want to bring this door blade forward a bit, so I'm going to move it by -7.5 along the z-axis, and this will place it right in the middle of this door frame. Okay, and that's it for this part. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next bit. Bye bye. Hi, in this lesson we're going to make the door blade. First of all, let's make the door and the ground floor invisible. Make sure that the door blade is selected. Go to the edge mode and hit Ctrl A to select all of the edges. Then let's go to structure, edit spline, edge to spline, and this will create this spline object here, which is automatically made a child of the door blade. And I'm going to drag this spline out of here, delete the door blade, and I'm going to make a copy of this spline, and I'm going to call this door window spline. And I want to have 2 windows on this door, so first of all what I'm going to do is scale this spline. Go to the model tool, activate the scale tool. I'm going to scale this on the x-axis and on the y-axis a bit, and I'm using a size of 60 on the x-axis and 180 on the y-axis. And also I'm going to move this down a bit by -5 on the y-axis, like so. And like I said, I want to have 2 windows on this door, and I want them to be evenly spaced apart. I'm going to use a symmetry object for this. And the important thing here is that the symmetry object needs to be at the same position as the door window spline. And the easiest way to achieve that is to select this door window spline, then press and hold the Alt key, and then create a symmetry object. And this will have 2 effects. First of all, the door window spline will automatically be made a child of the symmetry object, And if you take a look at the object axis here and switch between these two objects, you can see that the object axis of both of these objects is at the same position, which is exactly what we need here. So now let's make sure that this window spline is selected and go to the move tool. Let's check the snap settings. I'm going to switch snapping off here, and now we can move this window spline over on the x-axis to where we want it to be. And I'm going to position it at 50 on the x-axis. So next let's select the symmetry object, make it editable, drag the window spline out of it and delete the symmetry object. And now I'm going to select the door blade spline and the door window spline, right click and connect these two splines, and we can get rid of these two now. And if you select this new spline, you can see that the object axis is back at the center of the Cinema 4D grid, which always happens when you connect objects. And this was quite handy when we connected the window sills, window panes and so on the ground floor, because the fact that the object axis was centered on the Cinema 4D grid means that it was easy for us to copy these objects around and duplicate them to the other sides of the building. But here we really need this object axis to be centered on the spline. So I'm going to use axis center again, and again we can use the default settings here, so just click execute. And next I want to extrude this spline, and again make sure that the door blade spline is selected, then press and hold the Alt key and create an extrude nurbs object. And you can see that the door blade spline is again made a child of this extrude nurbs object, and that the object axis of both of these objects is at the same position. And as with the ground floor walls, the extrude nurbs creates a default movement or a thickness that I don't want right now, so let's go to the attribute manager, and on the object tab I'm going to change the movement to 0 to get this flat object here. What I also want to do here is create rounded corners for the windows. Let's select the door blade spline and go to the point mode. I'm going to select these 2 points here, then go to structure, edit spline, chamfer, and now if you click and drag your left mouse button in the viewport, you can chamfer these points, but you can see that we don't really get rounded corners, and this is due to the settings of the door blade spline. So let's undo this and click on the door blade spline to bring up its attributes in the attribute manager. We have to change 2 things here. First of all, I'm going to change the type to Bezier, and also I want to change the intermediate points from none to adaptive, and you can see the effect that this has. That's not what we want, of course, but we can easily correct this. Select all of the points by hitting Ctrl A, and then go to structure, edit spline, hard interpolation, and this will bring the shape of our door blade back. And now again let's select these 2 points at the corners here and go to structure, edit spline, chamfer, and if you left click and drag in the viewport now, you should get nice rounded corners. And I'm going to use a radius of 55 here. Okay, so next I want to make this extrude nurbs object editable, but before I do that I want to make some more changes to the settings of this door blade spline. If you take a look at the attribute manager, you can see that the angle for these intermediate points is 5 degrees by default, and this angle defines the detail that we get on these rounded corners. So if I bring this all the way down to 0, we get the maximum detail, and you may not be able to see this here in the viewport, but if you select the extrude nurbs object and make it editable, you can see that we have lots and lots of points here, and this of course is too much detail, so I'm going to undo this and select the door blade spline again, and I'm going to change the angle to 15. Let's go to the front view, hit O on the keyboard. I'm going to switch the display to kuro shading lines, And if you render this, you can see that we now have much less detail here. And I think we could use a little more detail, so you can do whatever you think is best. Here I want this to have a little more detail. Okay, so I'm going to change this angle to 7, and this looks okay. And now let's select the extrude nurbs object again, make it editable. You can see we don't have that many points, but we have nice rounded corners here. Okay, and this converted object consists of a single polygon, and if you want to, you can keep this angle, but I'm going to subdivide it into a number of four-sided polygons and triangles. Now you can do this manually by using the knife tool again, or we could also use functions, remove n-gons. And you can see that the n-gon is removed, but we don't really get a very nice looking mesh here. It's kind of messy, so I'm going to undo this again. What I want to do here is cut part of this mesh and then use the remove n-gons function. So let's use the knife tool, and in the attribute manager I'm going to use the same settings that I used for cutting the ground floor wall. So deactivate restrict to selection, activate create n-gons, and I'm going to use the constraint option here with an angle of 90 degrees. And on the snap settings tab I'm going to activate snapping and select point and deselect edge and midpoint. Make sure that the snapping type is snap 2.5D. Now you have to be careful where you place your first cuts here, because if I cut from here to here, for example, what happens is that we get this weird looking geometry and this opening here is closed off. Okay, so this is not good, and I'm going to undo this. You have to try and find out where you can place your first cut. Let's try this one, and this is better, but we still have an issue here, so I'm going to undo this as well. Let's try this corner. This looks alright. Now we can try to cut here. It still looks alright. And now I think we can make the rest of the cuts like so. And now let's see what happens if we use the remove n-gons function again. And you can see that now we have a much nicer looking mesh. And it's okay to have these triangles for these rounded corners here, because this is just a flat object and we're not going to use hypernurbs to smooth it. So it's okay to have these triangles here. And also we're not going to bevel any of the edges on this door blade, so we don't have to worry about these corners here, which will be trouble spots when we bevel the edges. But just to show you what happens if you try to bevel edges on an object with this sort of geometry, I'll make a copy of this original object, make the original object invisible. We're going to delete this copy later on, so we don't have to go back all the steps. Okay, let's go to the polygon mode, and I'm going to right click, extrude these polygons, and I'm going to create caps here. Extrude this by any amount you like, then go to the edge mode and use the loop selection tool to select these edges, right click and bevel these, and I'm going to use a large bevel here, make this about 3.5, bring the Phong angle down to get rid of the shading, and you can see that something doesn't look quite right here. And if you render this, you can see that we have a big problem here at the corners. Okay, so let's undo this. And if you have an object like this and you decide that you do want to bevel the edges, there is a way to get clean edges. Let's go back to the polygon mode, and I assume that you want to bevel the edges on this front side here. Now we have all the polygons of this on this side already selected. What I'm going to do is go to functions, melt to create an n-gon, and now I'm going to press and hold the control key, switch to the edge mode, and this will convert the polygon selection to an edge selection. And we have most of the edges selected now that I want to bevel, but I probably also want to bevel the edges in the corners down here. Okay, and in this corner up here. Now let's right click bevel, and I'm using an inner offset of 3.5 here again. Now let's reduce the Phong angle, and you can see I didn't check the create angons function when beveling these edges, so we're getting our original mesh back, but now you can see everything looks much better. We get nice and clean bevels here, and if you render this, this looks alright now. So this is a possibility of getting clean bevels on objects like this. What we also would have to do is go and check the mesh for any trouble spots or things that we can improve. And if you rotate around to the back of this object, you can see we have new geometry here, and in this case we don't have any trouble spots, but we don't need that many polygons. So what we can do here is go to the point mode, and I'm going to clean up this mesh a bit. And for example, we could select these 2 points here, then go to structure, weld, and weld these 2 points to here. Okay, and there's nothing else we can do in this corner. And over here we can do some more welding. If you want, you can use the spacebar to switch back to the life selection tool. Select these 2 points, hit the spacebar again to go back to the weld tool, and I'm going to weld these 2 points to here, and then I'm going to select these 2 points, weld them to here, and over here select these 2 points, weld them to here, and I'm going to weld these 2 points to here, and in this corner I'm going to select these 2 points, weld them to there. Okay, and up here we could also use some improvement. So I'm using the life selection again and weld these points to this position, and select these 2 points, weld them to here, and over here let's select these 2 points, weld them, and these 2 points, and this one's a bit difficult to select, so I'm going to switch off only select visible elements and select this one, and make sure that you only have 2 points selected here. Okay, now go to structure, weld, and weld these points to there. And now we have cleaned up this mesh quite a bit. Okay, so this is how you could get clean bevels here and clean up the mesh so that you have a nice looking object. Okay, now let's select this object and delete it. Make our original object visible again. I'm going to delete this polygon selection tag. We don't need this. Let's rename this to door blade. Okay, now let's go to the polygon mode, and I'm going to extrude these polygons now. So right click, extrude, and again we're creating caps here, and I'm using an offset of -3.5 to give this some thickness. You have to hit Ctrl A this time and select all of the polygons. We have to reverse the normals here. Okay, now we can get rid of the polygons over here, so let's use the loop selection to select these polygons. Get in a little closer. Okay, get rid of these, and I also want to loop select these polygons here, right click and split them off. This is going to be our door window frame. Okay, let's make a quick break now, and when we come back we're going to make the window frames and the window panes on this door blade. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you then. Bye bye.